Hola, buenos noches, and good evening. This is your weekly news report, and I'm your host, Pedro. Officials in Minnesota are suing the federal government to stop the deployment of thousands of immigration agents to Minnesota, the state's top prosecutor said Monday. The lawsuit, filed in U.S. District Court in Minnesota, includes the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul as plaintiffs and names officials with the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection as defendants. Speaking at Monday's news conference, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey cited the number of police officers in his city, roughly 600, and called the deployment of thousands of federal immigration officers wildly disproportionate. The complaint was filed one day after Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said hundreds more federal officers are heading to the state amid protests over the killing of Renee Nicole Good by an ICE officer. Good was in the driver's seat of an SUV in a residential part of Minneapolis on Wednesday when she was killed. Now here's Rafa with our next top story.
Last year was the third warmest in modern history, according to Copernicus, the European Union's climate change monitoring service. The conclusion came as no surprise. The past 11 years have been the 11 warmest on record, according to Copernicus data. In 2025, the average global temperature was about 1.47 degrees Celsius, or 2.65 degrees Fahrenheit, higher than from 1850 to 1900. U.S. agencies are expected to release their climate measurements for 2025 on Wednesday. NASA issues its report separately from that of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, since each uses different methods to compute global annual average temperature, typically resulting in some variation in the results. However, the trajectory of all those measurements has been clear. The world is warming rapidly, dangerously, and perhaps faster than scientists once expected. While greenhouse gas emissions are the primary driver of rising global temperatures, natural variability can play a role. The La Niña pattern, in which cooler than average water dominates the Central Pacific, tends to dampen global temperatures, while El Niño tends to raise them. A La Niña pattern took hold in late 2025, but no AA scientists expect a transition back to neutral conditions early this year. Now here's Enrique with some breaking news.
European troops were arriving in Greenland on Thursday in a show of support, as leaders scrambling to respond to President Donald Trump's threats were thrown another American curveball. Trump pushed ahead with his aim of conquering one European territory, Denmark's top diplomat said after a high-stakes meeting in Washington on Wednesday. The president then sided with the man who invaded another, casting Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky rather than Russia's Vladimir Putin as the obstacle to peace. In his latest reversal on the conflict already raging on the continent, small numbers of military personnel from France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Finland, Norway and Sweden were arriving in the Arctic island early Thursday. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova warned that any attempts to ignore Russia's interests in the region will not go unanswered and will have far-reaching consequences. Now we send it back to Pedro.
A handful of state Democratic parties are making bids to hold early 2028 primaries as the National Party gets set to remake its nominating calendar ahead of the next presidential election. The New Hampshire, Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, New Mexico, and Delaware state parties confirmed to NBC News that they submitted applications ahead of Friday's deadline to hold primaries during the party's early nominating window in 2 years. Nevada and South Carolina plan to apply as well, their state party leaders have said, and others may push for a spot in the early window too. Friday's deadline is just an initial step for the Democratic National Committee's effort to rewrite its nominating calendar. The DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee is expected to have a lengthy debate over what schedule would be best for the party. After President Joe Biden won the 2020 nomination, limping through the first few contests, before a dramatic victory in South Carolina's primary lifted him beyond his rivals, the DNC, with Biden's backing, moved South Carolina to the front of the line, and giving Michigan and Georgia the right to hold their primaries in the early window. Top Democrats promised an overhaul of the nominating calendar after Biden's loss, as the DNC was searching for a new leader. And state parties have been making their case ever since. Now here's Ariana with a look at this upcoming week's forecast.
Hello, everyone. I'm your chief meteorologist, Ariana, with your forecast for the week ahead. Deep troughing will cause chilly below-average temperatures in the eastern and northern U.S. and will bring lake-effect snow. Ridging over the west coast and deep troughing over the central and eastern U.S. will cause temperatures to be far below average. This pattern will increase chances for lake-effect snow that could become heavy. Gulf moisture is forecast to return as well to the south-central U.S. and toward the mid-south midweek, with a chance of some wintry precipitation in the middle. Mississippi to Ohio Valley late week into next weekend. Temperatures for the upper Midwest is forecast to be well below average, with overnight low temperatures as cold as 10 below zero. The chilly temperatures will track into the eastern part of the country midweek, with lows in the single digits as far south as Kentucky and east to Pennsylvania. Near to above average temperatures are forecast across the western part of the country into midweek. Late next week, temperatures could dip below average for the western part of the country, dependent on the pattern aloft. This pattern is also forecast for the southwestern deserts region, with forecast models showing conflicting reports dependent on the pattern aloft. Here's a look at your 7-day forecast for the Phoenix, Arizona area. We'll see very pleasant temperatures to start the week with mostly sunny skies through midweek. Slight chances of rain currently show for late next week, with temperatures at or slightly below average. Now we send it back to Pedro.
That will do it for this week's weekly news report. As always, thank you for watching and have a great week. Como siempre, gracias por ver el video y que tengáis una buena semana.